Donald Trump is now claiming that his war got, well, a surprise endorsement from a former president.
Look, for 47 years, no president was willing to do what I'm doing, and they should have done it a long time ago. It would have been a lot easier. There's no president that wanted to do it, and yet every president knew. I've spoken to a certain president, who I like, actually, a past president, former president. He said, I wish I did it. I wish I did, but they didn't do it. I'm doing it, yeah.
Which president?
I can't tell you that. I don't want to embarrass him. It would be very bad for his career, even though he's got no career left.
Okay, a lot packed in there. Trump says a former president wishes he would have started this war with Iran. The former president is so jealous, he wishes he could have been as powerful and bold as Donald Trump. Wishes he could have been the one to plunge the United States into an open-ended conflict with a country of 93 million people without feeling really the responsibility at all to think through any of the consequences, as Trump has not thought through.
What's happening, people? Welcome to Jack Mockler again. Trump's own team is unraveling on Iran. Officials are contradicting him publicly and resigning, while intelligence testimony has lawmakers questioning the war's justification. With gas prices up and the conflict dragging on, the collapse from within is more damaging than any outside political attack. We are not talking about some low-level staffer who got fired and decided to write a memoir for profit and attention. We are not talking about a disgruntled former employee with a grudge and a book deal looking to cash in. We are talking about Trump's director of national intelligence, one of the most powerful intelligence officials in the entire federal government. We are talking about his director of the National Counterterrorism Center.
Of course, Trump can't say which president it is because that would, quote, embarrass him, though apparently he likes this person. There you go. But look, here's the thing. There are only 4 former U.S. presidents still living on this earth. Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden. That's it. Those 4. There they are. Now, Emma's now reached out to spokespeople for Presidents Clinton, Obama, and Biden, all of whom confirmed that they have not had any recent conversations with Donald Trump about Iran. And the Wall Street Journal has confirmed through a spokesperson that President Bush also did not have a conversation with Trump about Iran. 1, 2, 3, 4. There you go. None of them had a conversation with Donald Trump. So why is Donald Trump claiming that a former president told him he was super jealous of Trump's war? Is the current president lying? I mean, entirely possible. Is he confused? Is he both lying and confused? I mean, my gut is really on option C as in both, but honestly, we don't know. What we do know is that this whole weird lying about a conversation with a former president episode is part of a pattern. This is not a one-off.
A man who completed 11 combat tours and lost his own wife in service to this country. We are talking about senior Republican senators who have been loyal to this president through everything, through multiple impeachments, through countless investigations, through scandal after scandal after scandal, and who are now publicly saying that this war is a disaster unfolding in slow motion. One House Republican told a reporter in a moment of stunning candor, and this is a quote from someone inside Trump's own party, "He is screwing us into political oblivion." That is not a Democrat saying that. That is not CNN or MSNBC editorializing. That is a Republican congressman talking about his own president in the most damning terms imaginable.
Every day, Trump seems to say something about this war that is directly contradicted by reporting. I mean, for instance, just yesterday, Donald Trump repeatedly claimed that prior to the start of the war, nobody in his administration knew that Iran might respond by attacking U.S. allied Gulf nations. In fact, they were shocked.
They weren't supposed to go after all these other countries in the Middle East. So they hit Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait. Nobody expected that. We were shocked.
You said they hit Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait. Nobody expected that. We were shocked. Are you surprised that nobody briefed you ahead of time that that might be their retaliation?
Nobody, no. The greatest experts, nobody thought they were going to hit. They were, I wouldn't say friendly countries. They were like neutral. They lived with them for years.
There's Peter Doocy again asking really good questions. Look, here's what Trump said. Nobody knew. Nobody thought they were going to hit those countries. Peter asked him if he was angry, he wasn't briefed on it. And right on cue, here was the headline, of course, from Reuters last night. Here's what it said, quote, Trump was warned of likely Iranian retaliation on Gulf allies, sources say. They absolutely did know that Iran would attack those Gulf countries. It would have been a natural part of any briefing.
So today, we are going to go through all of it, because this story is bigger than most people realize, and it has implications that extend far beyond this one conflict. And the reason it is not getting the attention it deserves is that it is complicated. It has a lot of moving parts. It involves intelligence reports and Senate testimony and resignation letters and congressional votes and satellite imagery and casualty counts. And when a story is complicated, it tends to get buried under whatever the loudest and simplest headline happens to be at any given moment. But complicated does not mean unimportant. Sometimes the most complicated stories are the ones that matter most to the future of our democracy and our constitutional order. And this one matters enormously because it goes to the very heart of how decisions about war and peace are made in America.
But Trump claims they were all shocked. Another example? I have more. Here was Donald Trump yesterday talking about the possibility that Iran has placed mines in the Strait of Hormuz.
We hit, to the best of our knowledge, all of their mine-laying ships. Now they can put them on other types of ships, I guess, and drop them in. But we don't know that any have even been dropped in. We're not sure that any have been. We don't know that they have dropped any in. We don't know if they even set any mines. They may have no mines set.
He says that the U.S. government does not know if Iran is laying mines in the Strait of Hormuz. He says there may be no mines set, none whatsoever. It's a mystery. It's a mystery to Trump. Of course, it's really not a mystery at all. I mean, here's the headline from the New York Times. U.S. officials say Iran is laying mines in the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. officials. Now, according to the Times, we do know the answer to this question, and that's according to U.S. officials. And the answer is yes, Iran is absolutely laying mines in the Strait of Hormuz. And it's not just the reporting that is contradicting Trump these days. It's also his own officials. I mean, the very people he installed in this government, many of them were sources for all those stories.
Here is the core of what happened and why it is so devastating for the administration. Trump's own intelligence chief submitted written testimony to the Senate, confirming that Iran's nuclear program had been destroyed and that Iran made no real effort to rebuild it. That is a significant statement. That is the kind of statement that goes to the heart of why this war was started and whether it was justified on factual grounds. But then when she was called to testify live on camera, she pulled back dramatically. She avoided repeating those specific details. She hedged and danced around it, and that created a stark and documented contradiction between what she was willing to put in writing and what she was willing to say out loud with cameras rolling and the world watching.
Now, when Trump took office, he made two big, alarming personnel decisions at the Office of National Intelligence. He made Tulsi Gabbard his director of national intelligence, and he made this guy, Joe Kent, the director of America's National Counterterrorism Center. And Joe Kent was not some kind of career bureaucrat with a long history of intelligence work, or really a person with a history of any intelligence work whatsoever. He was a twice-failed MAGA congressional candidate who had a history of associating with far-right figures and peddling debunked January 6th conspiracies. He was a loyal member of what you might call the Tucker Carlson wing of the MAGA movement. So loyal that he reportedly ordered an analyst to write an intelligence assessment about the relationship between Venezuela and Nicaragua to better align with the whims of the president. Well, today, that guy, Joe Kent, officially resigned from the Trump administration, citing the president's war in Iran as the reason for his departure. Trump was then asked about Kent's resignation in the Oval Office, and this is what he said.
Are you kidding me? That is not a small thing. That is your own intelligence chief creating two different versions of the story depending on whether she thinks it is going to be clipped and played back on social media. And then the day before that Senate hearing, Trump's counterterrorism director resigned in a move that sent shockwaves through the national security community. Joe Kent, 11 combat tours, Gold Star husband, not a political animal, not someone looking for attention or a cable news contract. He wrote a letter, and that letter went viral with staggering reach, saying that Iran posed no imminent threat, saying that Trump had been deceived into this war by Israel and comparing the whole thing directly to the Iraq War, one of the greatest foreign policy disasters in American history. That is not a fringe opinion being whispered in corners. That is a message that reached nearly a third of the entire United States population from someone who was literally inside the building, from someone who had access to the same intelligence the president had, and his conclusion was, this war should not have happened. That is the story. That is what we are dealing with. Not just a credibility gap between what the government says and what satellite images show. Not just a question of damage reports being downplayed and minimized, but a fundamental question about whether the American people were told the truth about why this war started in the first place, and whether the people closest to the president believe the answer to that question is no. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you are going to see how deep this actually goes. And it goes very deep into the structure of power and the mechanisms of accountability. Let's get into it for real this time. All right, so let's start with Tulsi Gabbard, because I think her situation is actually the clearest window into what is happening inside this administration right now. And it is genuinely remarkable when you slow down and look at it carefully. Here is a woman who Trump personally selected to be his Director of National Intelligence. That is one of the most powerful intelligence positions in the entire federal government. She has access to everything, every classified briefing, every agency report, every piece of information that flows into the national security apparatus of the United States. Trump picked her. He trusted her with that role. And what did she do with that trust? She submitted written Senate testimony confirming that Iran's nuclear program was destroyed and that Iran made no meaningful effort to rebuild it after that destruction. Now think about what that means for the war's central justification. One of the primary arguments for military action against Iran was the nuclear threat. The idea that Iran was dangerous and getting more dangerous. That Iran was building towards something terrible. That action was necessary and urgent and could not wait. And here is Trump's own intelligence chief in writing, saying the nuclear program is gone, and Iran is not trying to put it back together. That should have been a massive headline dominating every news network. That should have been the story of the week with round-the-clock coverage. That should have had every journalist and every senator demanding follow-up questions and accountability immediately. But then she got in front of the cameras, and the written version of Tulsi Gabbard and the live-on-television version of Tulsi Gabbard were two very different people. On camera, she hedged and softened and obscured. She avoided repeating the specific details she had been willing to commit to in writing. And that gap, that difference between what she wrote and what she said, tells you something important. It tells you that even the people inside this administration know that the full truth about this war's justification is politically explosive, and they are trying to manage it rather than just state it plainly and let the chips fall where they may. Now let's talk about Joe Kent, because his story deserves real attention, and it is not getting nearly enough of it in the mainstream media. Joe Kent was Trump's director of the National Counterterrorism Center. This is not a political appointee in the traditional sense. This is a man who spent his career in the most dangerous and high-stakes corners of American national security. 11 combat deployments. He lost his wife, a Navy SEAL, in a counterterrorism mission in Syria. He is not someone who walks away from a post lightly. He is not someone who resigns for political theater or to generate publicity. When a man like Joe Kent resigns and writes a letter, you pay attention to what that letter says, because it comes from a place of deep conviction and experience. And what it said was absolutely devastating to the administration's narrative. He wrote that Iran posed no imminent threat to the United States. He wrote that Trump had been deceived into this war by Israel, and he explicitly compared what happened to the lead-up to the Iraq War, one of the most consequential and widely condemned foreign policy failures in modern American history. That letter reached an audience of staggering size. It was read, shared, and discussed by an audience the size of a small country, and the White House response was basically to ignore it and move on as if nothing had happened. But you cannot ignore that kind of reach. You cannot pretend that letter does not exist. You cannot dismiss the man who wrote it as some kind of disgruntled partisan because his record speaks for itself in a way that most people in Washington could never match. His service, his sacrifice, his expertise all give his words a weight that cannot be easily brushed aside. Now, here is where it gets even more troubling, and this is the part that I think is the most underreported piece of this entire story. There was a missile strike on an elementary school, and 175 people were killed. 175 innocent people, including children, wiped out in a single moment of violence. Trump went public and blamed Iran. He said it in front of cameras. He made it part of the narrative about Iranian aggression and the justification for continued military action. But here is what was happening behind the scenes at the same time. The CIA had already told the president internally that they did not believe the missile was Iranian. And then within a single day, the CIA corrected itself and confirmed it was a U.S. Tomahawk cruise missile, an American missile that hit a school and killed 175 people. Trump had already blamed Iran publicly before that correction came through. But even after the correction, even after his own intelligence agency confirmed the missile was American, he continued to imply Iranian responsibility. Come on. This is not a mistake made in the fog of war and then honestly corrected. This is a pattern of blaming Iran for things sometimes before the facts are even in, and then not fully correcting the record when the facts turn out to be different. And that pattern matters enormously because it goes to the most fundamental question about this war. Did the American people get the truth about why it started and how it has been conducted? Were they told the full story, or were they given a version designed to serve a political purpose? Now let's zoom out and look at what this is doing to the Republican Party, because the political fallout here is significant and it is accelerating rapidly. Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, a Republican, called Trump's interim deal with Iran the worst foreign policy misstep in decades. He said Reagan is rolling over in his grave. That is a Republican senator invoking Ronald Reagan, the patron saint of the modern GOP, to condemn his own president's foreign policy. That is not a casual remark. That is a senator who has made a calculated decision that the political cost of silence is now higher than the political cost of speaking out. Senator Lisa Murkowski is demanding new intelligence briefings. Senator Jack Reed of the Armed Services Committee said publicly that he cannot vote to proceed to a bill that enables an ongoing war against Iran that Congress never authorized. And an anonymous House Republican told a reporter in words that are going to stick and be replayed for years that Trump is screwing us into political oblivion. That is a member of Congress from Trump's own party using that exact language about their own president, about a war that their own president started without asking them. And now they are being asked to fund it to the tune of a staggering amount in supplemental war spending, while also being denied the ability to formally vote on whether the war should even be happening. Think about that for just a moment. That is what the administration is requesting to keep this war going. Billions in new military spending alone. And they want Congress to write that check, without Congress ever having formally authorized the war in the first place. And when House Speaker Mike Johnson was asked directly whether Congress should vote to authorize the war, he dodged. He said they are going to supply the needs for America's national security, which is not an answer. That is a politician running away from a question at full speed while trying to look like he is standing still. 4 House Republicans actually crossed party lines to support restricting Trump's war powers. 4. That is a small number. But in a closely divided House, 4 Republican votes against the president on a war powers question is not nothing. That is a signal. That is Republicans looking at the polling numbers and the casualty reports and the satellite images and the resignation letters and deciding that their own political survival matters more than party loyalty on this particular issue. And when politicians start making that calculation, when self-preservation starts beating out party discipline, that is when things start to move fast and unpredictably. The broader picture here is this. Trump is now in a situation where the intelligence justification for the war is being contradicted by his own intelligence chief. The moral conduct of the war is being questioned by a combat veteran he personally appointed. Senior members of his own party are using words like political oblivion and worst foreign policy misstep in decades. And Congress, which never voted to authorize this war, is being asked to hand over billions to keep it going. That is not a sustainable political position. That is a pressure cooker, and the heat is rising with every passing day. So let's break this down into clear and simple understanding, because I want you to walk away from this with a real grasp of what is happening, not just the headlines, but the actual meaning underneath them. Because this story has layers upon layers, and every layer connects to something bigger and more significant. The intelligence case for this war has been contradicted from the inside. This is the foundation of everything else. If the war was justified based on the Iranian nuclear threat, and Trump's own intelligence chief confirms in writing that the nuclear program is destroyed and Iran is not rebuilding it, then the central justification for the war is in serious question, and that is not an opposition talking point. That is not a Democrat making that argument. That is the written testimony of the person Trump himself chose to oversee American intelligence. You cannot dismiss that. You cannot call that fake news or a political hit. It came from inside the House. It came from the top of the intelligence structure, and it raises a question that is not going to go away. Was this war sold to the American people on accurate grounds? Because if the answer is no, or even maybe not, then everything that follows from that needs to be reconsidered. The human cost of this war is being felt by people who cannot be dismissed or marginalized. Joe Kent is not a politician. He is not a pundit. He is not someone who spent his career in Washington collecting titles and making speeches. He is a combat soldier who did 11 tours and lost his wife in the line of duty. And when someone with that record resigns from a senior national security position and writes publicly that this war should not have happened, that carries a different kind of weight. It carries moral weight. And moral weight is something that political spin has a very hard time countering. You can call a senator partisan. You can call a journalist biased. You cannot easily dismiss a Gold Star husband, an 11-tour combat veteran who was sitting inside the counterterrorism apparatus and decided he has seen enough. The millions of people who read or shared that letter, they felt that weight too. And a lot of them are not people who follow politics closely. A lot of them are just regular Americans who saw a decorated soldier saying this war is wrong and it landed differently than anything a senator or a pundit could have said. That is the kind of moment that shifts public opinion in ways that are hard to reverse because it is not abstract. It is personal. It is human. And it is coming from someone with absolutely nothing to gain and everything to lose by speaking out. The school strike cover-up, and I am going to call it what it looks like, is the most morally serious element of this entire story. 175 people died in a school. The president publicly blamed Iran before confirming the facts. His own intelligence agency then confirmed the missile was American, and the president did not fully and clearly correct the record. That is not a procedural error. That is not a communication failure. That is a situation where the leader of the United States told the world that the enemy killed 175 children and civilians, and then quietly did not correct that claim when his own CIA told him it was an American missile that did it. If that story ever fully breaks through to the mainstream, if it gets the sustained attention that it deserves, it will be one of the defining political moments of this entire administration. And it is sitting right there, documented, reported, waiting for the moment when it can no longer be ignored. The Republican fracture is real, and it is getting worse with every new development. This is the political consequence that is going to shape everything between now and the midterms. The GOP is in an impossible position right now. They are being asked to fund a war that Congress never authorized. They are watching a war that their own members are calling a political disaster. They are seeing approval ratings drop in districts they need to hold. And they are trapped because if they vote against the war funding, they look like they are abandoning the troops in the field. And if they vote for it, they are writing a blank check for a conflict they privately think is going badly and may be impossible to win. There is no clean exit from that box. And the voters in those swing districts are going to be making decisions in November based on what they see between now and then. The four House Republicans who already crossed party lines on war powers, that is a preview. That is not the end of the Republican fracture on this issue. That is the beginning of it. As the war drags on, as the costs mount, as the satellite images keep coming out, as more resignation letters get written, as more senators demand briefings, and more House members go on background to say things like political oblivion, the pressure on Republican incumbents in competitive districts is going to become unbearable. And at some point, enough of them are going to decide that survival matters more than solidarity. And when that happens, the political math in Congress changes dramatically. Now, what does all of this mean going forward? Where does the story actually go from here? A few things seem almost certain at this point. The intelligence contradiction is not going away. Gabbard's written testimony exists. It is documented. It is part of the congressional record. And as long as this war continues, reporters and senators and oversight committees are going to keep coming back to it. The gap between what she wrote and what she said on camera is going to be a recurring question in every major hearing from here on out. That is not a story that gets resolved with one press conference. That is a story that lives and breathes and grows. The war authorization fight is going to escalate. Congress cannot keep writing blank checks for an unauthorized war while also telling their constituents that they are responsible stewards of taxpayer money. At some point, the institutional pressure becomes too great. At some point, enough members decide that on-the-record accountability matters, and when that debate happens openly in hearings and on the floor of Congress, the questions about the intelligence justification and the school strike and the resignation letters are all going to come back into focus simultaneously. That is going to be a very uncomfortable moment for this administration. The Iran war is becoming a political survival crisis for Republicans facing voters in November, with no congressional authorization, rising casualties, intelligence contradictions, and resignations from the administration's own officials. Americans deserve answers about the war's justification, its costs, and what happened at that school, but they're getting hedged testimony and ignored resignations instead.